Hello and welcome to the latest Royal Roundup from Talk. So pop the kettle on. This is the Royal Tea. I'm Sarah Hewson. Coming up on today's show, the King returns to the forefront of duties. Plus, Harry and Meghan promise there are more trips to come following their outing to Nigeria. And find out what the Queen vows to never buy again. Joining me to discuss all that and more are Vanity Fair's royal editor Katie Nicholl and the Mail on Sunday's editor-at-large Charlotte Griffiths. Now, King Charles and Queen Camilla attended a service at St Paul's Cathedral on Wednesday, honouring the Order of the British Empire. Dressed in rose-pink cloaks, the mantle of the Order of the British Empire, the King and Queen smiled in the sunshine and waved to the large crowds outside as they left. The service of dedication was attended by almost 2,000 holders of honours, including OBEs, MBs and CBs from across the UK and the Commonwealth. And Katie, I think what's significant about this engagement was it was big. It was a large number of people inside St Paul's Cathedral. And for all the talk about the King sort of easing himself back in gently in a lighter programme, actually, we've been seeing a lot of him.
We have. We've seen over the last couple of days, we've seen him carry out 5 engagements. Now, if you compare that to the King before his diagnosis, he would think nothing of clocking up 5 engagements in one day. So I think he has certainly scaled back, but the aesthetics are very much that he is there. So his diary is not as busy, but we're seeing plenty of him, whether that's at garden parties or at this service. And of course, it was interesting to see him at the service at St Paul's because he wasn't there at the service at St Paul's that Harry was at last week, of course, for the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. So, you know, I think it was an interesting comparison there. But he was there in his ceremonial robes with the Queen by her side, with as you say, an audience of 2,000 people. So this is not a low-key engagement. And of course, neither are the Buckingham Palace garden parties. I think there were 4,000 at the most recent one. Again, slightly smaller than what we're used to. And so I think you're seeing all of the visibility, but you're seeing engagements that he can do, and they are just a little more spaced out.
And Charlotte, Katie mentioned the garden parties because we had another one this week, and it was very celebrity-focused, a celebration of the creative industries. And there were a few lovely moments, actually, but one particularly with between the King and Maya Jama, educating him about Love Island.
Yes, she was talking about snogs on Love Island. And it was different, this garden party, because DCMS organised it. So instead of being your usual sort of courtiers inviting, let's just say, stuffy sort of people.
Yeah, so that's the Department of Culture, Media and Sport.
Yeah. It was cool celebrities like Maya Jama. So she was teaching King Charles about Love Island. And
he didn't seem to know about it, did he? But he talked about one born every minute.
He did, but I think that was a very funny joke because I think he was making a joke about how many reality shows there are.
Yeah, I think it was the affiliation of reality shows.
Yeah.
And that was probably one he has heard of. I'm not sure he's a Love Island fan.
But I also thought he was saying, another reality show, there's one born every minute. Maybe I'm reading too much into his sense of humour.
Oh, I see in terms of punning that there's another... Oh, that's very... I mean, that would be very quick thinking.
Quite clever, right?
Yes.
But that was quite fun. And Maya Jama looked incredibly glamorous as well. And it's so nice, I have to say, it's so nice to see a bit of glamour at these parties because they can be a little bit staid and stuffy. But with all these celebs, you know, they were wearing very glamorous, you know, chic TV kind of star outfits. It looked great.
And I think she also said, oh, well, I broke protocol last time I met you because I touched you and I won't do it this time. And he didn't seem to mind.
Oh, I mean, he doesn't. And, you know, whenever you see the King in the company of a glamorous, elegant woman, he really comes to life. He does. He enjoys it. And, you know, he would have loved it. I mean, it was
he was almost slightly flirtatious.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. You said it, Sarah, not me. But this is the point I was trying to make. Yes. Absolutely. And, you know, he would have loved it that she was wearing that really elegant dress. And, you know, I think you can see how much he enjoys that. He really comes to life when he's with those sorts of people. And, you know, whether he knew about Love Island or not, he totally enjoyed meeting her.
I was going to say, do you remember when Jerry Halliwell kissed him years ago?
Yeah, and he was
ever since then, he loves it. He
Absolutely.
loves a cheeky celebrity.
Queen Camilla was also talking to the model Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, wasn't she? And complimented on her new range of lingerie that she's launched. I wonder how much they get briefed beforehand about who they're going to meet and what they're doing, or how much actually they do know about these things.
I mean, they do. And when you watch them sort of go on their different paths, they are told, right, you're going to meet so-and-so. She's a model, by the way, and she does underwear for M&S, you know, and that just gives, because they have to be able to say something to acknowledge them. But I think they were speaking to, I think it was the Queen speaking to Arlene Phillips as well. But you see, she clearly remembered meeting Arlene.
Oh, because
before.
she loves Strictly as well.
She's a massive Strictly fan. So I think, yes, they get the cue cards as a bit of a guide, but when they come across someone they've seen before, they really will make an effort. They'll recall that meeting. And of course, if that's you being on the receiving end of that audience, you suddenly feel so special. Oh, the King remembered me. The Queen remembered our last conversation.
And back to kind of business, really, isn't it? Because we also had his first major investiture this week with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Charlotte. I mean, he is out and we are seeing him doing the job again, which is wonderful after those months away.
Definitely. I think last week he was doing one or two things and it was and it seemed they've obviously said, look, Charles isn't going to do that much because he's reintroducing himself. So the first week was a bit like that, a bit slow. Second week, he's doing 2 events a day. He's doing the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's non-stop. So clearly it is back to business. And yes, and I thought that was so nice when he gave the Archbishop the sash, and they clearly know each other quite well and had a chuckle. So it was good to see him doing those kind of things again.
Perhaps the most significant engagement for the King this week came on Monday when he handed over a prestigious role with the Army Air Corps to his son, Prince William. The King had become Colonel-in-Chief of the Army Air Corps 32 years ago and now has been succeeded by his eldest son. The announcement about the official ceremony caused quite a stir last week as it came while Prince Harry was visiting. Prince Harry, of course, served with the unit in Afghanistan, and I think the honour would most likely have gone to him had he remained as a working royal.
Well, absolutely, because he flew in one of the squadrons, 100%. And I think, a lot of people were speculating, well, was this a snub? And was the timing particularly meant to sort of be a slap in the face to Prince Harry? I mean, you know as well as I do that these engagements are planned well in advance. This was probably one that had a question mark over it because they wouldn't have known if the King was going to be well enough. But it was clearly going to happen. It was very much the King's intention that William would take on this very prestigious honour. Many might say, well, he wasn't the one flying the Apaches, that was Prince Harry, and serving not just 1 but 2 tours of Afghanistan. And of course, William wasn't in position to do that. But he is the future head of the armed forces as a future king. Of course, we know that he flew search and rescue helicopters and he served with the RAF. He looked delighted, I thought, to be back in the cockpit. I don't know how long it's been since he was, back in and flying a helicopter, but he looked thrilled to be doing that. And delighted, I think, to be standing, actually now towering above his father.
Yes,
he is so tall.
That, yes.
And they used to be, shoulder by shoulder. But I thought it was a really tender moment, a really tender engagement. And as much as it highlighted Harry being an outsider from the royal family and all he's lost by exiting, I think it also showed that renewed closeness between father and son.
And the King described it as being bittersweet in some ways, didn't he? Because he was handing over a regiment with which he's had a very long association.
Yeah, I was quite touched by that. He spoke about how he'd been at the head of it for 32 years, and he seemed almost emotional, I thought, and he was standing there in front of an Apache, which of course Harry used to fly when he was in the army, and I just felt what with everything going on with his cancer and everything, I just felt there was an extra layer of meaning there. He was sort of saying goodbye to something that was very, close to his heart for a really long time.
But saying you're going to be in good hands and telling them, he's a very good, very fine pilot about William. Let's talk about Queen Camilla. She has vowed to no longer buy fur. A letter sent to animal rights campaign group PETA in April said Camilla will not procure any new fur garments. In response, the charity said it will be toasting Queen Camilla with a glass of finest claret. Your thoughts? Kate?
Well, I think, we know the Queen is an animal lover. She loves her dogs, she loves her horses. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember her ever being a massive lover of fur. I don't see Camilla turning out in fur a lot. When you think back to the late Queen Elizabeth, particularly in those early days when it was all about the pearls and the diamonds and the fur, she was such a glamorous young queen. And actually, the late Queen Elizabeth did also stop wearing fur herself back in 2017. So I think... Listen, I think it's very on trend. I think it's what people appreciate. I don't think you're going to see, I don't know when the next opportunity Camilla will have to wear a ceremonial robe that might have fur. We've done with the coronation now. But if there was an opportunity like that, it might be the Order of the Garter. And obviously they have the ostrich plumes. She's not going to suddenly stop doing that because she will always, I think, acknowledge that tradition and those rituals, but she's not going to step out in a fur stole. And I think that is sending out the right message and making her look like a very modern queen consort as well.
Some opposition to the move, arguing that plastic-based substitutes, plastic-based furs aren't sustainable, and of course the king and his environmental agenda, and that the monarchy shouldn't be placed under pressure from animal rights activists. I'm not sure it's just animal rights activists, actually, is it now? Really, as Katie mentioned, it's just kind of moving with the times?
I think it's moving with the times. They've obviously got a checklist of things that they knew might come up when she's the queen. You know, think traps not to fall into. One of them is not serving foie gras anymore. The other one was the parchment got changed to paper for the scroll at the coronation, because parchment's made from animal skin. And so anyway, I think this is really just about that. I think it's just about seeing the pitfalls. Yes, it's true that fake fur is made of plastic, but, you know, as Katie said, she doesn't wear a lot of fur anyway. No. She's long since changed her hat. She often wears a fur trim around her hats, and she changed that a few years ago, actually. But how much plastic pollution can a fur hat made of plastic make? I think it's fine. I think it's, well, I suppose it's another trap she could fall into, but, you know, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't otherwise.
It's a bit like Charles's approach, I think, to the ivory. And you remember he went head-to-head with his son, with Prince William, over that, because, of course, William's campaigned with Tusk and other charities to ban and stamp out that illegal ivory trade. And yet, you know, Charles has put some of the ivory away at Buckingham Palace. You know, it's not out there in everyone's faces, but he's not going to destroy it. He's not going to have it all burnt. So I think it is that acknowledging of tradition whilst projecting that image of a modern monarchy, which is really important for Gen Z and all the young people out there who want to see the monarchy being on trend and understanding what modern society wants and needs.
Speaking of burning, she's not getting rid of any fur she already owns. That was in the statement, wasn't it? You know, from now on, she won't be buying fur. She won't be buying any new. She's not. I mean, a huge statement would be, wouldn't it, to her to gather all her fur up and declare that she'd burnt it all. But she's not going quite that far. And this is a woman who used to fox hunt quite a lot for many decades. So, you know, I'm sure we know she's fond of animals. She loves dogs and animals, but she's not a PETA campaigner, is she?
No. One of the big talking points of the week is the first completed official portrait of the King since the coronation. And the King himself unveiled it at Buckingham Palace. The painting by British artist Jonathan Yeo depicts King Charles wearing the uniform of the Welsh Guards, of which he was made regimental colonel right back in 1975. Charlotte, I would say the reviews of this painting have been pretty mixed, because it's not your typical royal portrait, is it? It's
not. It's very, very, very red. And that has, you know, garnered quite a lot of cheeky jokes online, dare I say. But I think it's great. I love Jonathan Yeo. I remember when he did Cara Delevingne a few years ago. He was so cool, and he's really cool. You know, Cara Delevingne's a cool person. He paints cool people. And I think this is a great modern move from Charles, because, you know, he's getting down with the kids. He's got a modern portrait going on. Yes, it's very red, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I love the comparison with Camilla's, though, because Camilla was painted by the same artist a few years ago. Hers is really neutral.
It is, isn't
by
it?
Comparison.
Yes.
But I don't think he was making a point, Jonathan Yeo. He said he was picking up on the colour of the garment, and he just wants to have a sort of modern take on it.
I mean, my take is that actually the red, when you first see it, it is quite arresting as an image, isn't it? But then as you look at it, you just see the King's face standing out, and you look at the man rather than the uniform, for example.
And I think he's really captured the man.
He really has.
Yes, and the Queen said that. I think she was invited to have a little sighting of the portrait before it was actually finished, and she commended him on getting Charles's likeness. And I think he really does shine through. I mean, I think arresting is a really good word to use with it. It's, you know, it is very red. It's very overwhelming.
It's huge as well.
And it's massive. I mean, it's oversized.
Feet,
yeah, it's oversized. But actually, you know, to have that sort of image of Charles, of his face at the centre of it all, it's an image of majesty, and maybe what he's trying to show is, with all the flux and the transience and the colour and the brightness of life, there's something very steady at the heart of this, and that's captured in that picture. And
also the detail of the monarch butterfly just on the King's shoulder, which apparently was the King's own suggestion.
Yeah, it's not his environmentalism, and also as he has emerged from a chrysalis, as he made a joke about himself, because the portrait was first painted, or he first sat for the portrait before he was king, and now he's emerged as a monarch, like a butterfly. So there's a lot of symbolism there. And actually, Charles had a cheeky joke at his own expense, saying, you know, oh, it's like I've come out of a chrysalis. So, it's really touching, really sweet. It's on the shoulder. And actually, it's quite unusual for a sitter to sort of suggest what goes in the picture. So it was obviously very important to him.
The Prince of Wales has carried out engagements in Cornwall and made his first visit to the Isles of Scilly since becoming the Duke of Cornwall, meeting businesses and organisations that use the main harbour. William travelled to St Mary's Island, home to the largest population among more than 200 islands, to tour the waterfront and learn about its importance to islanders. Charlotte, he arrived there in beautiful sunshine, in a part of the world that actually he's holidayed in with his family, but this time, of course, on his own, because the Princess of Wales is still receiving treatment for her cancer.
Yeah, it must have been bittersweet because they've had really special holidays there because it's incredibly private. Because as you say, although it's the biggest island in 200, it's still tiny, tiny, tiny. So they've had really special times there. And the locals were quick to ask about Kate, and he said she's doing well, she's feeling good, that kind of thing. You know, he wasn't giving too much away. But it was quite sad. I think she would have liked to have been there if she was feeling better.
He was certainly away overnight.
He was, yes.
Katie, wasn't he? Which, look, it's hard to know what's going on, but I suppose that is reassuring in that he is able to go away for that period of time. Initially, those engagements were quite close to home.
You know, absolutely. I mean, when you consider it wasn't so long ago that he pulled out of an engagement at the 11th hour, the memorial service for his godfather, you know, for him to actually be off quite far away from home and overnight, I think is an indicator that that he clearly felt self-assured enough that he could leave his wife at home. We don't know if Carol's there, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but the fact that he was able to do it, I think, is a good indicator. And in fact, I have been told by very good royal source that that the princess is doing well, that she, after finding the treatment quite difficult at first, she has turned a corner. And I think perhaps that's also a sign, a good sign.
Good news if that,
very much,
you know, is the case, because it has been an incredibly difficult time for all of them. Meanwhile, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's Archwell Foundation is no longer listed as delinquent by California's Register of Charities and Fundraisers. This was a story that blew up on Monday. The charity was listed as delinquent and a notice letter was sent to the foundation for apparently failing to submit required annual reports and or renewal fees. But by Tuesday, the status of Archwell Foundation had been changed to current. The letter had warned that an organisation listed as delinquent is banned from soliciting or dispersing charitable funds, and its registration may be suspended or revoked by the registry. I mean, it's all been cleared up now, but it made for a pretty stark headline.
Yeah, the damage has kind of been done, hasn't it? All I can think of is that word delinquents, which could be applied to Harry as much as it could be about his company, quite frankly. But and actually, the Nigeria tour, I think, had been such a success for them. You know, they should have been jetting off, toasting the success with a glass of champagne.
Because this came just as they were heading home from Nigeria.
And instead, it's like, oh my gosh, we've just ended this tour, and then suddenly we're brought back down to earth with a big bang. And you would have just thought that they were actually last year late in filing their returns as well, that someone somewhere would be on top of the paperwork and these errors wouldn't have been made.
Well, they claim they were, don't they? And actually, it was filed on time.
But the cheque was lost in the post.
And they had tracking on it, but it didn't get filed properly. And extraordinarily, we had the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, leaping to their defence and saying, you know what, this is all nonsense. It's a minor technicality and it happens to everybody. And, you know, I hope this gets as many headlines as the initial reporting of the story.
Well, of course it didn't, did it?
No.
That was the point. I just think it's, you know, anything that someone can get hold of and turn into a negative headline, particularly about Archwell, it's just feeding into that. And perhaps it was just unfortunate on their part, but I do think it was a shame after such a successful tour that this overshadowed it somewhat.
And as Kate said, it was that word delinquent. It was just so hard to resist. You know, news agencies around the world just leapt on it. But as you say, it was a $200 cheque. It's such a small, minor amount when you think how much she spends on an outfit. You know, $2,000. So it was a bit of an own goal. But I think she said that it's because the cheque took too long to clear. But as you say, I don't think that the governor jumping to her defence is going to get as many headlines around the world. And there is a clip of her coming off the plane, because this was all happening literally as she was coming back.
As they were in the air.
And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but you can see online there's a sort of video of her marching miles ahead of Harry, well, a few feet ahead of Harry, into her car and, you know, looking cross, basically.
I mean, you can understand that, can't you? Because you'd be thinking,
oh,
very
what
frustrating. Now? Yeah, come on, what now?
And they've got such a huge number of staff at their organisation. I was looking through the list the other day and they've all got really important sounding names and there's millions of them that work there. And somebody should have picked up on this,
Somebody's dropped a ball, whether it's at Archwell,
I wonder if a head will roll and that
California.
list will be 1 or 2 names shorter by the time you check it again.
Let's talk a little bit more now, shall we, about that Nigerian tour. Harry and Meghan have vowed to carry out more overseas visits following their successful 3 days in Nigeria. Prince Harry said it was hugely important for the couple to meet people face to face and listen to their concerns in order to instigate change. Well, royalty regular Afia Hagan is currently in Nigeria and she gave us her thoughts on the visit.
Afia, thanks so much for joining us. Afia joining us live from Nigeria. And Afia, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have headed home after their 3-day tour. What kind of reception did they get in the country?
I mean, they got such a warm welcome, a really West African Nigerian welcome. People were really pleased that they came. The visit was super packed. I only sort of caught the last day, which was incredibly packed. But people were really happy to see them. Such a warm welcome, mobbed by crowds. It was intense, but it was lovely to see.
Now, from where I'm sitting, and you know, I've covered multiple royal tours before, this had the look and feel of a royal tour. Did it to you?
It did and it didn't. And I can understand why a lot of people are like, you know, this is a royal tour. I mean, it wasn't a royal tour. It was a royal couple as private citizens doing philanthropic work. But I can understand why people are kind of saying this looked like a royal tour. It wasn't a royal tour. It had the feel of it, but they're not working royal, so we can't say it was a royal tour. But I think also we haven't really had a royal tour like that for a long time, for actually, you know, quite sad reasons, because King Charles III hasn't been well. Neither is the Princess of Wales, and I think probably one of them would have given us that royal tour goodness that we're used to having in the past 6 months, and we haven't had that. So it kind of has filled that vacuum. But, you know, it wasn't a royal tour, but it was a very successful tour of a royal couple.
And for me, I suppose, listening to what you're saying there, Afia, and looking at them out there in Nigeria, it just highlights what could have been, the role that this couple could have played, particularly in Commonwealth countries.
You're absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. Look how well they were received. You know, it was culturally sensitive. It was bringing up issues that, you know, haven't really been talked about in Nigeria. When we talk about wounded service people, wounded veterans, disability in that country, the reasons for that, which is, you know, because you've got wounded service people from wars they've been fighting within their own country and out with their country, you know, highlighting those issues, being in a Commonwealth country, being so well received, showcasing the culture so brilliantly. You're so right in saying that it's really highlights what a loss they are to the royal family and how well they would have done across the Commonwealth. And I think actually that's why you've had this, we have seen the narrative that we have from really quite a lot of sections of the media who seem to be like fuming, frothing at the mouth that they dare to even go there and dare to get out safely and dare to have an amazing time while they were there.
And just talk to us about the Nigerian connection for Meghan, the fact that this was personal for her, Afia.
Yeah, definitely. So she did a DNA test and she talked about it on her podcast Archetypes, actually, that she found out she was 43% Nigerian. And so when she was talking about that, a kind of panel she did, a women's empowerment panel, she talked about finding out, calling her mum and telling her about it, and then how amazing it was for her to find that out and to have those connections, you know, and how it felt to come back or come home, as it were, to Nigeria, and how special that felt for her. And they definitely had an amazing time. At the end of the trip, they said that they would be back. And I can imagine that they really will.
You mentioned this was about the Invictus Games, the meeting service personnel. Nigeria wants to potentially host the Invictus Games in the future. It was also about announcing Archwell partnerships while they were there as well. How much of a cloud do you think went over this tour with that news that the charity had been labelled as delinquent?
No, with that story, I think that the problem with that story is that it's all about a bit of paperwork that got lost, then was filed, and now everything was fine. I don't think it's coincidental that that story came out just as they had come back and just as this tour had been a success. So in terms of what kind of cloud does it hang over, I don't think it actually hangs that much of a cloud over the trip, to be honest. I think some people would want it to, but I don't really think that it does. And you mentioned there about Invictus Games. You mentioned about Nigeria putting in a bid for 2029 to host the Games. And I think when it comes to talking about Invictus, and definitely talking about Invictus in Nigeria, it's really, really important that that time was taken to shine a light on injured servicemen and to shine a light on disability and mental health issues in a country where it's not often talked about that much. You know, so it's a cultural thing. It's a West African thing. And I think it's brilliant that the opportunity was taken to talk about these issues. And I think if Nigeria gets a chance to host Invictus in 2029, that would be amazing.
One of the criticisms I did read about the tour, Afir, was that it was so closely and tightly controlled that actually members of the Nigerian public didn't really get a look in. They didn't get anywhere near them to see them. Is that the case?
Well, some of them did, to be honest. You did have some people who did get a chance to, I mean, you saw the pictures of Meghan taking selfies with some people. But yes, I mean, they were invited by the Nigerian defence staff. So it was definitely going to be tightly controlled, tightly guarded, kept quite small for, you know, security purposes. And I think that was really important. So yeah, it was quite tight. It was quite a tight press pack. Not a huge number of people there, but crowds did turn out to sort of line the streets and try and see them, definitely.
Afir Hagen in Nigeria for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Casey, what did you make of this trip from the coverage that we've seen of it? I mean, you and I have been on a lot of royal tours.
It looked like a royal tour, Sarah. I know it wasn't, but it looked like one, didn't it?
It really
did.
The
visits to the schools, the visits to the locals, the charities, the issues
the governor's
that they care
reception.
About. You know, the red carpet was literally rolled out for them. And of course, this was an invitation at the behest of the Nigerian defence. And I don't know, it did look like a royal tour. And I think for them, they must have been absolutely delighted with how it went, because they were, you know, they sort of got that rock star welcome and they got all the meetings that they wanted to do. They got the chance to promote Invictus, got the chance to promote their work. And I suppose what it's affording them is, well, firstly, great material for whatever they're going to do for Netflix next, because clearly that would have happened. Mm-hmm. But also, and equally importantly for them, is that attention of the world stage. So, you know, you've got William and the Scilly Isles, but they're battling for the front pages because, you know, Meghan in her Nigerian couture and Harry, you know, with his Ray-Bans on in the sunshine, dancing. That's going to make a front page, whether it's a royal tour or not. And you could just sort of see that battle of the headlines again between the brothers. It reminded me of just a few years back when that tension was just beginning to emerge as to who was going to get the headline.
It's the kind of rival court.
Absolutely.
And if Kate had been on the Scilly Isles, that it would have been a real battle.
Yeah.
And actually, they must really be missing Kate, because Kate's incredibly glamorous as well, in her own way, in a very different way from Meghan, of course. If Kate had been there, it would have been a real battle. But unfortunately, you know, Meghan and Harry wiped the floor with our
William should have
side
been
of the royal
photographed
family.
in his wetsuit doing that swim he told everyone
Some
about.
sort of
Then he
stunt.
might have had a chance of making the front page.
But what about the glamour? You know, it still would have been missing the glamour. It doesn't matter what William wears, to be honest. You know, Meghan looked like a superstar.
I was going to say, it was a Meghan show, wasn't it? And she was very much at ease there.
Yeah.
And she talked a lot about this being my country, because, of course, she had discovered that she's 43% Nigerian. And I think she was given a number of African princess titles while she was there by traditional rulers.
There was a lot of talk of how she was coming home and this is my home and you are my family. And Harry said, you guys are my in-laws. I actually personally think they were over-egging the pudding by the end. I was like, OK, we get it, you're 43% Nigerian, Meghan. But I also thought, I'm afraid, that it was just a big Meghan fashion show. I thought there was way too many costume changes. Sometimes she was changing in the middle of an event. And I think she risked overshadowing the message of Invictus, actually. I thought there was a little bit too much Meghan. And that would never have happened in the royal family. They would have, you know, tried to make sure there was a real balance, and the causes that she was supporting would have had more attention. But anyway, that's not what their aim was. Their aim was a little bit to make Meghan look fabulous. And I have to say, she did.
In many ways, Katie, what they did in Nigeria was exactly what they proposed when they were at the Sandringham Summit, isn't it? So they've got their own independent lives. They're able to have their commercial interests, be financially independent, but still do these overseas tours.
Absolutely. And they would have, if we go back to that scenario and say they'd been told, yes, all right, we'll find a way to make this work, they'd have been in Nigeria doing trade and investment, flying the flag for Britain and the monarchy overseas. Instead, they're flying the flag for Meghan's wardrobe. And there is the contrast. You know, and like you say, it's these two rival courts. You've got the court in Montecito, and then you've got the court of the House of Windsor. And I think while that event was a success, it will be brilliant footage, it put them on all the front pages. When you look at what they're actually doing, it sorry to say it because it feels cruel to say it, but it feels slightly shallow when you compare it to what's going on proper royal tours, even if it's just a 2-day trip to the Scilly Isles. That, you know, that's what we expect of the royal family.
I mean, I don't know, because I think if you are going to think about Harry and he's sitting there next to the bed of an amputee and they're talking about the power of the Invictus Games. And actually, we've talked a lot on this show, haven't we, about wanting to see more of that.
Yeah, of his charitable work.
Of the charitable work. More of the philanthropy and the charity and less of the kind of mudslinging. Then actually, we've got to expect them to go out around the world and promote
But I think
Invictus.
I completely agree with you. But I think there needs to be then more attention on those engagements, more attention on that charity work. And I agree with Charlotte that so much of the attention was on her outfits and was on her. And I think that's a real shame, because they do have an incredible, unique spotlight, and they can use that to do remarkable work. Whether or not they're representing the royal family, for their philanthropy, it's priceless.
It reminded me of the statement that they put on their newly formed website when Brexit was announced, and it said, everyone can serve, service is universal.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. That set the tone for their entire way of being, which is, you can say we can't do stuff, but we can do stuff.
It's not just up to you.
Yeah, we can be on a pseudo-royal tour, actually, and you didn't let us do it officially, so we're just going to do it our own way.
And I think there are going to be more of these tours as well. I think we're going to see them do more of these things. Other countries will have been watching and they'll think, well, hang on, let's get Harry and Meghan over to here and we can show them what we're doing in our country. And they'll give us that sort of exposure, because you cannot buy that sort of exposure.
And it's really important to the brand, isn't it? Because they don't just want to be celebrities living in California who are ten a penny. They do want to be taken seriously and to be seen to be showing up and doing good, as they say on their website. Yeah, and do you remember when Meghan, we used to say she was presidential, and then that died out a bit, and now people are saying once again that she's presidential. She kind of lost that trail. For a moment, we actually thought she was going to run for the White House when she was first on the world stage. And then, you know, she brought out her jams and it all just became, as you say, a bit ten a penny. But now she's back and looking very stateswoman-like, Well, and she's got the Governor of California on side, so never say never. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a very good point.
Thank you both very much indeed. That is all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Katie and Charlotte for their thoughts. And if you want to join in with the debate, please leave a comment and make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss a single episode. We will be back next week with all of the latest on the royal family. We hope you can join us. We'll see you then.